information, about how the data is not matching with the reality. So I thought to do a bit of study on the term and the concept of inflation and CPI data in Nigeria, specifically taking Nigeria as taking Nigeria as my example, as my country of reference. So inflation basically, like we know, is the rate of increase of prices of goods and services over a period of time. But the Nigerian inflation, okay, so Nigerian CPI data measures the average change in the price paid by consumers for goods and services. So a lot of times we see this and we're like, people are always like, what you are saying is inflation is reducing, but we are not seeing reduction in price. So there are different components of inflation. First, Nigerian inflation, the way Nigerian inflation figures were being calculated was a bit too tweak. So when you say something is changing, if you are calculating change, you do final minus initial. So before 2025, the initial figure, or the figure or the data of reference for that change was 2029 data, 2029 cost of prices and goods and services. But that was changed because statistically you are allowed to change your start point or your rebase date to rebase your data. You get. So your start data, you're allowed to change it after a particular number of years, which Nigeria has exceeded, to actually show, to make sure that your data is actually capturing the reality. Because as time, over the years, prices of goods and services are bound to change, increase with time. So, and then even the appetites of people, the consumer structure of your society also changes with time. And so because of that, you want to make sure that you are capturing. Imagine 2009 and Nigeria in 2005. What people buy most are different. In 2009, voice for, even though there was telecom, voice data was more of where they were getting their money, so voice call. But now in Nigeria, you see data call, and you will see that more people are consuming that than ever. There are a lot of things that would also change. Your housing prices would also have changed over time. Data has taken a significant part. Data has almost become a basic necessity for Nigeria, and that comes under telecommunication. So if you look at all these, you need to know why they had to change to reflect the current reality of Nigeria. So there are different components that the CPI looks at. So there are different things that the different cost of different sector or different things in the society that is being considered to calculate your inflation figure that you see. And these components are, we see food and non-alcoholic beverages, household equipment, information and communication, which I just talked about, clothing and footwear, health, education, housing, utilities and fuel, transport, restaurants and accommodation. All this, you now understand why it is that at certain points, certain inflation data varies per month depending on how the prices of this individual components react. Now, beyond the fact that the base year was changed, that means the reference year for change to calculate change was actually done. Beyond that, they also changed the percentage because people had looked, and you know that right now some people they might not eat so much, but they might spend more money on data. There are people that will spend more money actually on food. It's weird, but yeah, there are people that will spend more money on data. And so in prior to 2025, that's in 2009, the food and non-beverage aspects of the components of the inflation data was actually carrying a weight because they weight it. So if you look why they have to weight it, because a typical Nigerian income, if you are going to look at it, does not spend everything equally. If you get your earnings per month, most houses might spend 50 to 60% on food, 20% on energy costs, 10% look at do like a research to look at what is obtainable now. Before, food and non-alcoholic beverage, that's like your normal soft drinks, we are taking 51.8%. Currently it was reduced in 2025. After the rebasing, it was reduced to 40.1%. So meaning previously food hold a greater weight, and so a slight increase, food hold more than half the basket. So it means that where the how do I put it, where the cost or the inflation figure will go, will be affected greatly by food. So if you tilt, or will I say, so if your food prices go high, you would usually see an high inflation figure, which was what we saw last year when we were getting up to 33% and all. 33% for inflation figure is quite high, but even you as a person could see that your food inflation had increased. Your food, let's take spaghetti or pasta that you usually buy for 250 had increased to like 1,000. That's like almost 4 times increase. So 4 times, if you're doing 4 divided by 100, okay, 4 times, if you're looking at it in percentage, that's like 25% already. For certain items it will increase more than that. And so you can see the reality of the data when they tell you inflation data is actually 33, because even when you go to the market you could see that it is 33, but that was reduced to 40% because probably they felt that or they found out that people don't spend half of their salary on food and non-beverage. Some people spend less, so they slightly reduced it to 40 based on research data. They also increased the fact of restaurants and accommodation. So restaurants and accommodation, that was 1.25%, increased to 12.9%, telling you that more people were now going out. So people were eating out as against cooking at home. So more people were patronizing restaurants and we're eating out, unlike before. If you even look at the world we are in, the country, you would know that a lot of people are now so busy working that they do not have time to cook for themselves. So most people order out or eat out. So because of that, the weight of that also increased. Also, the weight of transport, education and health also increased. So transport was 6.5%, it was increased to 10.7. I'm sure they would have done research. Typically you can, to verify or to like verify or to see how close to reality this weight is to your own income, you can actually do it. How much do you spend on electricity and transportation? How much do you spend on food and housing? How much do you spend on food and drinks? How much do you spend on housing, health and education? You can do that and do a percentage of your income, and then you'll be able to tell how close this is. For food at 40%, I would agree, yes, that to me is actually true. Food, it can even be higher for some people depending on your earnings. So I guess they looked at the total, they took a sample that is a representative data of the Nigerian economy, and based on that they did that. So how is NBS reports? How does NBS, so the body that reports inflation figures monthly is NBS, Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. And how do they do it? So your inflation is reported in 3 forms. So headline inflation, which is the total inflation. So all of the baskets, after they've calculated it, they will now give you the inflation figure, the change in price in percentage. That is called the headline inflation. inflation of all datas. Now another inflation that affects Nigeria, that Nigerians are mainly important with, because that carries the highest weight. 40% of the inflation data being driven by food means that food would actually be impactful in deciding the monthly inflation data. So another core thing they report is food inflation. So what is food inflation? And personally, as a person, that's the one I'm almost most times interested in: food and energy costs. Why? Because for me, that's one thing that affects my own. For me, food inflation would even be my major inflation data. That's what I'll look out for, because that's what affects me most. Because yes, of a truth, I spend a large percentage, if not 50% of my income on food. So that is very critical for me. So that's why, even though inflation data might be saying 14 or 16%, for some people it might be higher, because if food inflation is like 20%, for some people their inflation is actually 20%, because they spend almost all of their salary or income on food inflation. So as much as there are different baskets, depending on how you distribute your income individually, what you spend on, that would also make you know what to look out for when you look at food inflation, to know how to actually suggest how real those data is. Core inflation is another thing they report. Now, core inflation involves removal of energy, removal of volatile items like food and energy, so fuel, electricity, gas. So if you remove fuel, electricity, gas, and food, volatile means this cost changes. So we are looking at the prices of things that are more stable. You pay in Nigeria for most places once in a year. Medicals, if you have an insurance, that should cover it. Education too is like quarterly. So most of the other items are more stable and don't change. You don't just wake up and change those. So that's those other items fall under what they call core inflation. So I would put the figure or the data of the Nigerian inflation number comparing 2024 and 2020 vis-a-vis 2024 and 2025. November 2024 headline inflation was 34.6, and a lot of people might be like, yes, actually it was that high. If you know where we were they are comparing it with 2029 data, 2009 data. So you can imagine things in 2009 and things in 2024. You know that it's even as higher than 34%. So food inflation was almost 40%. That's like 39.93%. So you can see how high that was. So in all fairness, last year was last year figure, I guess a lot of people were not doubting it, because the figure was indeed a representative of what we were seeing. Now, the rebasing changed the initial year from 2009 to 2024. What that means the change becomes, imagine spaghetti that was 250 in 2009, or maybe around 150 in 2009. That's your pasta. And at 2024 it was 1,000. You can imagine the percentage increase. But if you are now checking between last year and this year, yes, obviously food inflation can be 11%. Between last year and this year-on-year inflation can be 11%, because there have been at least a bit of stability in the prices of goods and services in Nigeria, owing to the FX stability too. So they are now comparing between last year and this year, which is why you are not seeing significant high figures. But does it mean the prices of those goods and services has reduced? No. But what I have seen is some have reduced, but majority of them have just remained stable. Even the reduction has not been significant to the point where you would say it has dropped from 39% to 11%. The reason is, if you were going to compute it with the pre-rebased data, that's 2009, it will still be just as high, maybe just less, maybe like 33% from what somebody said when they calculated it. But now you are calculating based on last year. So if you compare price of things last year and this year, obviously it hasn't increased significantly. So to say the data is not entirely correct, it's not like it's not correct. It is correct. It's just what they did is they changed their method or their initial points. If you're a science student, final minus initial. and you know the farther apart your initial value is from your final value, the greater will probably your change. But now, because it's now 2 subsequent years where there have been lower increase in price, the value is now looking okay. But yes, it will still, you will still feel the pinch as you felt it last year, except your earnings have increased in same term. You will still be seeing prices of goods almost same or slightly lower. You know, rice has reduced, as a lot of people will say, rice has reduced, you know, but not enough to say that the reduction has been 11% compared to the values of 209. You know, so the rebasing, so it's still taking its effect. It's actually what has made it look a bit lower. If you were going to use the standard way, like I said, the reason why they rebase is that normally it is statistically is expected that you do that. When you are going to do a statistical sample, you take a sample that is a representative of what you're doing. Your sampling point or your sampling number has to cover quantitatively the number of data you want to analyze, or the number of people you want to sample. So because of that, yes, and then looking 209 to 225 is it's quite a long time. So yes, that data needed to be changed. As to whether it needed to be brought closer to 2024, probably what they wanted to do is that, okay, we have seen a devaluation, we have seen subsidy removal. These are the biggest hits. You know, these are the biggest hits to the value of prices of goods and services. So why not take the data after that to get a true, so it's like starting afresh. This is where we started after devaluation, and then devaluation and also inflation removal. Now let's start afresh and see what to know between last year and this year. You get? So that is to a good extent is actually a better representative of what you're doing, to know if the reforms are actually kicking in. So you are comparing. So now in 2026 we'll be comparing last year with this year to actually now be seeing, or last 2 years, 2024 with 2026, we'll now be seeing, you know, are we really increasing or are we really decreasing? Another way that I would have given you a good value would be month on month. Month on month. So if you look at November and then October, you would also be seeing if really there's an increase in the prices of most of these things. Okay, so month and month figure too will give you a good idea. I would put the value of last year and this year inflation figure in this video. So for Nigerian inflation figure for November, headline inflation was 14.45. Like I said, headline inflation is the total inflation considering all the baskets, the changes in the prices of all the things in the baskets in percentage term, and that was 14.45. 14.45 after rebase. So they are comparing last year prices to this year, which is why you are seeing a lower decrease. You know, prior to then they were comparing 2024 to 2009. So you yourself, you know, you just need to pick house rent or pick food stuff. You know, there were things we were buying like maybe 20 naira that we are now buying almost 500 naira. So you can expect that the figure will be high. You know, so yeah, food inflation in November is 11.089. Now 11.089, remember there are a lot of things that affect food inflation. Seasonality, because we plant some of our food produce. When they are in season, we see a lower price. When they are off season, we see a pick-up in price. So we are currently still in the food harvest season. So because of that, we are seeing lower prices. For December, where we have festivity, we would need to take that into consideration. Another thing is that energy price too. You know, last month we were buying PMS at maybe almost 1,000, 910, 920. With Dangote reducing it to 730 and then NNPC at 8 something. You know that would also affect affect the cost of transportation, which is an input. So all these things are things you look out for. If you want to know, you can just pick up what you are buying, your grocery list, last year, this year, what's the price, what's the difference, and that will give you, and that is what they are doing. It doesn't mean that your prices, yes, you are comparing pre devaluation and pre fuel subsidy, which you would see that it's increasing, but they are comparing after devaluation and after fuel subsidy, which is making the data look okay. So core inflation is 18.07% in November. That means when you remove food and energy, you are now seeing 18.04%, and that is still quite high. Urban inflation 13.61, rural inflation figure 15.15. I wonder why this is, because I'm surprised that the urban areas we see lower inflation, lower increase in prices than in rural areas. I actually never understand why. Now, if you look at year on year, you will now see that there is a tick up in price. In October, overall inflation increased by 0.93 from September. In November, inflation prices increased by 1.2% from October, telling you there is an increase month by month. Between the 2 months, there was actually an increase in inflation. So if you saw a slight increase, you would know that, okay, yes, there was actually an increase. Year on year will not give you a better picture, except you are comparing last year data to this year data, as in last year prices to this year prices. But if you want to know, okay, let me pick a product in the last 1 month as it increase, to know that you will now be looking at month-on-month figure. Month-on-month, the inflation was actually increasing, as compared to year-on-year. Food inflation sharply to also increased, due to some unstable prices. So food inflation in November actually increased when you compare it to October. Core inflation improved slightly. Urban inflation month on month was slowed down. Rural inflation increases. As to why urban inflation is increasing, it's difficult to tell, because we would expect that where most of these produce, especially food inflation, is being produced, should be where we will see a lower increase. So that is it. So like I said, we know that what we are seeing, our purchasing power is reducing, but the net effect was actually due to your devaluation and then your fuel subsidy, which the inflation data is not capturing, because it's taking data after that. It's comparing prices after that, which is 2024 and 2025. So 2024 is now the base year, and so because of that, it is after fuel subsidy. So it's like a reset. So let's see how it goes. I guess thank you very much for joining me on this video. I hope you learned 1 or 2 things.